I was born in 1937, at the end of the Depression, and just before the start of World War II. By the way, I can remember when Pearl Harbor, it was a Sunday, and I went to church. I would have been 5 years old when Pearl Harbor was bombed, and going to church and everybody talking about Pearl Harbor had been bombed. And I didn't know whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. That's what I remember about Pearl Harbor. It didn't take long to know that we were at war. That's one of my early memories, is my mother and some of the other ladies in town. By the way, I was born in Peoria, Utah, in a log house. My mother said once, well, kept asking her where I was born. She said, "Oh, behind the couch." And I don't know whether I was really born behind the couch or she just told me that to get rid of me. But anyway, she and some other ladies in town printed a weekly or a monthly newsletter for all the servicemen from Peoria. I've counted up in my mind, I could count 27 guys. The town was only about 200 people that were in World War II, and that's one of my earliest memories of that time, was going with her to the other ladies' houses, and they'd type up this weekly newsletter and send it to all the servicemen. I didn't go to kindergarten. They didn't have kindergarten because of World War II, so I started the first grade in Camas. There was a school in Peoria, but about the time I was born, they consolidated and bused everybody to Camas, so I went to school in Camas for my entire high school and grade school. There was 5 boys my age, and we had a lot of fun together. 5 boys and four girls. We always had a birthday party for every one of us at their home, and that's one of my favorite memories, is those birthday parties that we had. But as a teenager, early teenager, we roamed all over Peoria. We all had chores to do at night, but if we had 3 hours, that was as good as a weekend. We all had a horse, but nobody had a saddle. So we would ride bareback. We'd go out, when I was in my early teenage years, on Sunday afternoon. Sunday school was out at noon. We didn't have to be back to a 7:30 evening meeting, but most of us had cows we had to help milk. We had to get the cows and take them back to the pasture, but we would have 3 hours. We'd get on our horses and ride out to Beaver Creek, which is about 3 or 4 miles, and go swimming. And you can imagine early teenage boys didn't worry about swimming suits, but we had a lot of fun, mostly just splashing in the water. But that was a Sunday afternoon event all summer long. Go swimming, yes, but we'd have to be home to milk the cows at night. But 3 hours for us was long enough. We'd get out there and run around and chase the cows that were out there and play in the water and be back to milk cows. To get the cows, we were too young to milk, but we had to go get the cows. And this was typical of all of the kids that I grew up with. But we roamed all over town, the hills, the mountains. I tell my kids when we go back to Camas Valley, if you can see a mountaintop, I've been on top of it. My years of running cattle and hunting deer and just running around in Peoria. My parents, I was born in a log cabin, and it was a 2-room log cabin. It was nicer than you picture log cabins of the early pioneers. It was well constructed, but it was old. It was probably built I'm sure in the 1800s. But my parents decided to build a house, and this was during World War II, and everything was rationed. I remember cement. You could get 2 bags of cement, and my dad would have his friends buy 2 bags, but they'd have to hide them. And when we'd need 2 bags of cement, we'd go down to Uncle Clarence's in his garage and get 2 bags of cement that he had bought because everything was rationed and they couldn't get supplies. But my friend that I run around with, Blair, and I decided we had these dairies, and they all had little calves to feed, and we'd ride those calves. And of course, we didn't want anything that was going to buck us off. We picked the little ones. But we were down to Blair's one time, and he had 3 or 4 calves in the corral, and we were riding them, and you'd get on them, and we had halters on them, and they wouldn't go. And we need some spurs. Who had spurs? I know what we can do. So we were down to Blair's house, and it was about half a mile where my house was, and we were building the house, and we needed some spurs because these calves this wouldn't go. And so I said, I know what we can do. That's one of my brilliant ideas. So we go up to my house and we get some shingle nails. Shingle nails were about 1.5 inches long. And we go back to Blair's shop, his dad's shop, and we pounded these shingle nails through the heels of our boot. So we had a nail sticking out of the back of our shoes. And boy, we were so proud of those spurs we had. We couldn't have been prouder of our new spurs. So we go over, got the calves, and we're in Blair's place, and they're his calves, and they had an orchard there. We catch a calf, and he wants to try out. No, I want to try out. So we had this argument, and finally Blair says, well, they're my calves, so I get to go first. And Blair was chunky. He wasn't fat. He was a chunky kid. So he gets on his spurs, this calf, and it wouldn't go, and so he spurred it. And that calf jumped straight in the air. And there was a branch sticking over his head. Blair hit his head on the branch and fell off on his back, knocked the wind out of him, and he's laying there, and I think he's dead. And he's gasping, it's your turn now. Needless to say, I didn't take a turn with our new spurs, but we had adventures like that all the time. I started Camas in the first grade, and one memory I have of first grade, Mrs. Decker was our first grade teacher, and from our room, she lived across the road about a block, and you could see her house from our room, and she forgot her keys to the closet one day. So she said, Jerry, will you run over to my house and ask my daughter for the keys to the house? I'd never walked around Camas in my life alone. And I had to cross the street. There might be a car coming. So I was scared to death. But I went over and I couldn't find Cora. That was her daughter's name. And I walked around the back. She was around back. Anyway, I got the key and came back. But I just remember how scared I was to walk around Camas alone. I'd been to Camas lots of times, but never alone as a first grader. But through school, one thing I remember about 4th grade, the only year I was ever the teacher's pet. And the reason was, in my mind, the first week of school, she said, how many pounds are in a ton? Nobody knew that. Well, we'd been to the bought some grain just a few days ago, earlier, and I was talking to my dad about how tons and how much grain. So I knew it was 2,000 pounds. So I raised my hands, Jerry. I said, it's 2,000, and I wasn't sure. It's about 2,000 pounds. And she says, it's not about, it's exactly 2,000 pounds. So from that day on, I was the teacher's pet in the 4th grade, the only year I was a teacher's pet. But I just had a lot of fun throughout my school. I had a lot of good friends. And